Welcome to the Forge of Freedom podcast. As you can see, we're doing something quite different than usual. We are coming to you live from the NRA annual meeting in Atlanta. And here in just a little bit, we're going to have John Richardson on as our first guest. John was recently elected to the NRA Board of Directors, and we're going to chat with him a little bit about his campaign and what some of his priorities are as one of the members of the NRA Board of Directors. And I've got a mic here. We're going to check out. We're going to do a little.
We just came off the floor. I still have my backpack on.
We're going to do a little bit of a sound check here.
I think I'm operating that correctly.
Yep. I think it looks like you're coming through. And if there's too much background noise here, we'll try to remedy that here momentarily.
I'm going to take my backpack off.
Thanks for bearing with us here. We're getting set up right at 3 o'clock. Obviously, we're coming in a little late. We have to transition the booth space between media sources. Charlie Cook, if you don't know Charlie Cook is the man behind Riding Shotgun with Charlie. You can find his channel on YouTube and various other podcasts. We're in the booth right after Charlie is, so sometimes it takes a few minutes for the transition to happen, but we'll come to you shortly after 3 o'clock tomorrow. And then there won't be any delay on Sunday because we'll be first on Sunday at 9 a.m.
You just jinxed yourself.
That's right. That's right.
But it's a little crowded here down this aisle at the booth because we are. I think folks know we're actually on the NRA annual meeting convention floor. So it takes a little while to get all the equipment down through the aisles and the spot that it needs to go. So we're here now, though.
We're here. And I just did a sound check. I know we're coming through on YouTube and hopefully on Facebook. I'll try to check that right now as well. If you're having any trouble hearing us, let us know in the comments and we'll try to remedy the situation.
And folks want to know, this annual convention's commenced actually this morning, and for the most part, it's 3 days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and we'll be here all 3 days.
Yeah, 3 hours each day, and I've got guests lined up pretty much every hour that will be here, all 9 hours. We'll have, as I said, John Richardson first up today, David Conte. He's the one of the NRA-ILA Grassroots directors. He's actually in charge of the Indiana region. We've got him next, and then we've got David Yamane, who's been on the podcast before as well. We're going to talk to him, and then John Howard is the last one today. We're going to chat with him about NRA training. He's the director of the NRA training division. So we've got quite a bit of ground to cover today, and looking forward to those conversations. So stay tuned for those. It seems like this is actually the first year we got to come into the convention floor before it opened as press. And it seems like it's been fairly busy today, although it's hard for me to gauge because we're not typically on the convention floor on Fridays. We're typically at the legal seminar and don't get to make it to the convention floor until Saturday. Of course, the convention floor is open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Lots of vendors here, but it seems to be a pretty typical turnout in terms of vendors. And I don't know, in terms of the attendance from the public, it's fairly crowded, but what's your perception so far, Mike?
Well, first of all, the caveat is, like you said, we've been coming for years and years and years, but I never come on Friday except to the attorney seminar, the legal seminar. If you compare it to a typical Saturday morning, it seems to me it's probably not as heavily attended as some of the peak conventions, what I'll call them, where they were attended several years ago. But I don't know. It's just my gut reaction at this juncture, and not grounded in much fact except my observation.
Yeah.
So now to tell people though that, I mean, if they're close, it's open until Sunday. NRA members get in free, and I understand that this year they're even allowing non-members to attend the convention. I think there's a $10 fee maybe for all 3 days.
Yeah.
And you have to check that for sure whether I'm correct or not on that. But it seems to be well into. I think they're advertising 14 acres. I'd have to go back and check and see how many acres they had in previous conventions in terms of the vendors. that are here. But it seems to be well attended, but not so incredibly crowded that you can't hardly get around either.
Tomorrow we're going to have a few guests as well. I'll go ahead and while we're waiting for John Richardson to appear, we will go ahead and talk through who else we're planning to have on. We've got Jacob Paulson. He's the president of concealedcarry.com. He wrote an article. It's an extensive article about lessons learned from 1,600 law enforcement interactions. So we'll get into some of the nitty gritty about what armed citizens should know about law enforcement interactions. I think that'll be a worthwhile conversation to tune in. That'll be 3:15 tomorrow. After that, we've got Stephanie Hetherton, who is a regional director, grassroots outreach for the Tuttle Twins book series, which is a book series that was started by Connor Boyack, the Libertas Institute, and it's a book series tailored toward homeschooling families or families that want to supplement the education they might be receiving or miseducation they might be receiving in government schools and or private schools. So I hope you'll tune in for that. I think I've read quite a few of their books myself. Just actually purchased a set for my son, their toddler series, but they have a series that goes up to older children. I think is actually a great education for adults too, who have missed a good civics education through their high school experience. So tune in for that. Dean Weingarten, tomorrow evening, he wrote an article. He's a regular contributor at AmmoLand. He wrote an article recently about the connection between privacy and the right to keep and bear arms, and how the right to keep and bear arms would be basically fatally affected if we didn't have privacy, if we didn't have the right to privacy and privacy safeguards in the law and in our technology. So I think that'll be an interesting conversation as well. Finally, on Sunday, we've got Glenn Hoyer. He's the director of law enforcement training at the NRA. He's been in that position for quite some time, a couple of decades at least, and talk a little bit about what he's learned through that position. And kind of in the same vein as the interview with Jacob Paulson, talk about what armed citizens should consider in their interactions with law enforcement, but from a slightly different perspective. Then we'll talk with Ronald Andring. He's a lifetime member of the NRA. He's one of the most knowledgeable members of the NRA that I've ever met. He has followed the litigation involving the NRA in New York very closely. In fact, he was, to my understanding, the only member to testify in the trial in New York. Of course, that trial, that case was brought by the New York Attorney General against the NRA, and there's been lots of fallout about that. So we'll get into some of that as well, and what sort of reform efforts are in place at the NRA. And then finally, we'll talk with Marty and Gila Hayes, who are the people behind the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, or of course affiliate attorneys with the network, and we'll let them chat about what the network is, how it helps its members, and what offerings they have available.
And I'll plug right now, if I can, you had an interview with Gila this morning in their booth. I don't know, it was probably half an hour long or so. I didn't pay close attention, something like that, about how fatherhood has changed your perspective on life. And I think with respect to firearms, it was a concentration. I didn't hear it all, but
on armed defense and preparedness mostly.
Yep. Yeah. So, folks, I'm not sure when that'll be on. It wasn't a live broadcast. I'm not sure when it'll be on, but people can look for that on the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network YouTube channel. Probably, I'm not sure, other social media outlets.
It'll be released on their website as well.
Okay.
armedcitizens.org, I believe, is their website. And then the last guest that we have scheduled for the weekend is Stephen Hallbrook. Stephen Hallbrook is a well-known attorney in the Second Amendment litigation space, probably the most recognized attorney in that realm. And
philosopher as well, a historian as well. He's written extensively in the area of the Second Amendment.
Philosopher, historian, lawyer, very impressive person, and I think will bring some great insight about what the current status of the Second Amendment is in terms of its the Supreme Court's posture toward pending litigation. So stay tuned for that. He was on the podcast previously, nearly 2 years ago now, as a matter of fact, to talk about his book, America's Rifle, the case for the AR-15. So if you're interested in that, go back and check that out. You can find that at forgeoffreedom.com. Just search for Halbrook, which is spelled Halbrook. But he'll be on Sunday, and that will be the last interview we have shortly before noon. He'll come on about 11:15. And I should say we are live, but these are being recorded. And after the show, I will piece these out into separate segments so that you can come back and check them out on our YouTube channel and our other channels as well. So, Mike, any other thoughts before we get into the interview with John? I think he's on his way. I saw him walk up here. And just,
one of the things you're going to talk to John about, I think, is the big 800-pound gorilla in the room at this convention is what's going to happen with the annual members meeting tomorrow morning. As most people know, there's been, I don't think it's an understatement to say that there's been quite a bit of turmoil in the NRA the last couple of years. And there's been a movement, there's really kind of two camps. There's what I call the old guard, and then there are the reformers and NRA 2.0. So that's going to be one of the most exciting, one of the most interesting things to me in terms of what's happening at this convention. It's not so much the gear and those things, but it's the election that's going to, or it's the meeting tomorrow that's going to be very interesting, I think. And I think John's going to talk about that someday.
Yeah, a little bit. And it will undoubtedly be quite contentious. It was a bit contentious last year, but I think has the possibility of being even more contentious this year. It's my understanding that the reform candidates won approximately 2/3 of the open seats that were available in the most recent election. And it will be interesting to see how that changes the balance of the board and whether or not the board and the organization can make the changes needed to salvage the organization. Right now, it's been limping along the last few years. Really, since 2019, it's sort of been in a downward trend in terms of membership and donations. And the reformers are trying to restore trust in the organization, to win back the trust of people who have left, and to attract new members to keep the NRA relevant for the future of the right to keep and bear arms.
And I think, this is just me talking, but I think the new EVP, Executive Vice President Doug Hamlin, has done a lot to move the ball, so to speak. But there's still a lot more work to be done.
Yep, indeed. All right. Well, I think John's making his way over here, so we'll get him in the booth.
So,
No.
So
Charlie says it's his dad.
Yeah, so John's here, so now the JV is going to move out and make room for John.
That's right. That's right.
You want this microphone?
Yeah, please. All right. All right. John is making his way.
It's very similar.
What's that?
It's something similar to one of those jams.
Oh, yeah. Get you mic'd up here.
Do you want me to take the badge this off?
No, it's fine. All right. I think you're coming through just fine. So
Just get a couple sips of water here. And... Oh.
All right, John. Well, thanks a lot for stopping by the booth today. I know we've recorded, I think, 3 podcasts together now.
I think you're right.
Yeah, which doesn't seem like it, but I looked back and it was. I know we talked leading up to the election for the NRA Board of Directors. We talked on a number of occasions, but this is the first time that we have actually met in person.
It is.
And the first time we've spoken since you were elected to the NRA Board of Directors.
You're absolutely correct. And as of tomorrow afternoon, even though I won't be sworn in, I will be a member of the board.
Yeah. So congratulations, I think.
I think is the best way to put it.
So, in all seriousness, congratulations. I know that you are well deserving of that position. And I think have the right ideas in mind to try to turn the organization around.
We're trying. We're gonna have a long way to do it, but we need to give members a reason to come back. We need to build value in their membership. It's not just selling it on $18.71, which is a nice idea, but give people a reason to join the NRA. The fact that we're fighting for their rights, whether they're in a club and we provide their insurance. There's a whole number of different avenues to bring people in because they're competitors. Now, I'm not a competitor. I never pretended to be a competitor, but it's a way to get people involved. And we need to what I really think we need to do is start to appeal to people of your generation, the millennials, the Gen Zs, the even. I'm looking at the board and I'm thinking, I'm not that young, and I think I'm in the younger half of the board. So, but we need to do stuff that give people a reason, whether it is we've drawn a line in the sand, we're not going to cross it, we're not going to compromise, whatever. Give people a reason that they want to join the NRA.
Yeah. Now, I know you followed the litigation in New York fairly closely.
I did.
The litigation brought against the NRA by the New York Attorney General, Letitia James. And obviously, there was a lot of fallout from that. There were lots of things revealed about the NRA that I would say made a lot of members either not renew or lose faith in the organization to some degree. So it's one thing to try to attract new members, right? The younger generation. It's another to try to restore trust in the people who lost that trust because of the things that were revealed through that litigation. If you would, tell us a little bit about what was revealed through that litigation, what efforts are being made to fix those issues, and what can the NRA do to restore the trust that was lost with many of the members that have left the organization?
There were a number of things. And probably the most egregious were the private jets for Wayne LaPierre, his wardrobe or whatever. And it was members' money going for fluff, for lack of a better word. They were diverting the plane that was supposed to be going to Florida from DC out to Nebraska to pick up a niece because you wanted her to fly with you. And that was a waste of money because I don't fly in a private plane. I don't own a private plane. I fly coach. But that was revealed. And the sad thing was, as much as Tish James hated the NRA, we found that she was the one looking out for the members, the rank and file members, and she should not have been the one. Things that have changed, we did a consent decree. We have the final order. There's efforts to make it more open. We have a chief compliance officer who is protected in the sense that while he could only be fired for cause, and by that I mean he does something wrong, he could be fired. But if we just fire him, we owe him 2-year salary. So there's this financial incentive to protect him, and that's good. They're working on policies and procedures, stuff like making sure that there are no exceptions to fly. And you can't fly first class just because you're some board member that's more favored than another. We fly coach. Do you need to fly? Is this something? Here's a perfect example. Traditionally, the NRA board meetings have been here at the annual meeting, one in September and one in January. Well, quite often the September meeting or the January meeting was held in Dallas or Anchorage or some place that might be very nice to visit. They're going to be in Fairfax. We don't have to transport staff to Dallas. We don't have to transport staff to Anchorage. They're there. They can answer questions. They can do their job. And then we're not paying for their hotel. We're not paying for jet flights. So that's a savings that we needed to do.
Yeah, and the NRA is one thing that's unique, and what's always been so that's differentiated the NRA from the Bloomberg sorts of groups, right? Is that the NRA gets its power, gets its influence, gets its money from the members. It's a grassroots
It's
organization.
everybody you see around here, and I'm very pleased with the attendance. And if it's this good today, I think tomorrow might be even better.
Yeah. And the problem is that the NRA was entrusted with using those dollars that they collected from their membership and tasked with using those dollars in a way that was beneficial to their members.
Exactly. I'll be honest, I wouldn't care if we had meetings in the Comfort Inn or a Quality Inn, someplace that's safe with a boardroom. That's fine by me. It doesn't have to be a 5-star hotel. They were doing stuff in the Ritz-Carlton. You were staying in private suites, stuff that just was not an efficient or good use of money.
Yeah, and it was not an efficient use of money, and it wasn't used in a way that was beneficial to the membership, right? And the private flights, the sort of channeling of personal expenses through third parties for personal benefit, those had nothing to do with benefiting the NRA membership. And that's why these compliance efforts that you've been outlining are so important, because the NRA's got to, I think, become more transparent about how those dollars are being used to regain the trust of its membership to either come back or to become new members.
Absolutely right. And when you think about it, it's much easier to sell an existing client than to go out and get a new one.
Yeah.
And that's basically what we're having to do.
Yeah.
But it goes beyond just saving money and compliance efforts. I sat in on the Legislative Policy Committee yesterday, and there were a couple of resolutions that said that we need to, in other words, we need to stop undercutting the gun groups that are non-NRA affiliated. For example, in New Hampshire, there was a big issue because all the gun groups were against one certain piece of legislation, and the NRA decided for whatever reason that they were going to be neutral, and then they were helping to modify the legislation to make it more palatable. If it's bad legislation, don't make it easier to pass.
Yeah.
The other thing that I do see, and I do think this is good, is on litigation. The newer ILA head of litigation, Joe Greenlee, is tremendous. Is a very much so a Second Amendment scholar, but instead of the NRA being the lone wolf going it on their own, they're sharing the load with other like-minded Second Amendment organizations, whether it's SAF, the Firearms Policy Coalition, NSSF, or whomever.
Yeah.
And so the more you can make that litigation money go, the better.
Yeah. And I can attest that Joseph Greenlee is an incredible scholar, an advocate for the Second Amendment. I heard him speak on a number of occasions at the NRA annual legal seminar that they host on Friday. Actually, today it's going on right now, as a matter of fact. I'm normally there, but I'm here today for the first time. I'm not at the legal seminar, and he's spoken there on a number of occasions. I think he works closely, or did work closely, with Dave Koppel, who's also a great Second Amendment scholar and advocate for the
and
right.
I saw Dave in the hallway yesterday, so I know he's here.
Yeah, Dave literally wrote the law school textbook on the Second Amendment.
He did.
Yeah, and so if you've got an interest in that, by the way, it's not cheap, but it's the treatise on the Second Amendment, essentially.
And I can proudly say he took something from my blog, a graphic. He asked me for permission to reproduce it way back when. And I was like, I'm in there.
Well, before you were on the board of directors, that was your claim to fame.
That was my claim to fame. That, and what seems to be that so much of NRA staff reads my blog.
Yeah. Well, you have, like I said, you covered the trial closely, but you've also kept up with other things about the NRA and the Second Amendment. So you've got a good, and speaking of your blog, I want to talk about that a little bit. You run Only Guns and Money.
Yes.
And the preface to that is no lawyers, only guns and money.
No lawyers, because it was based on the song "Some Lawyers, Guns and Money," and I was not a lawyer. I was a financial planner in a prior life. So I said, yeah, just make it guns and money.
Yeah. So only guns and money. And I can't recall off the top of my head, is it .org or .com?
.com.
.com. Okay. I've been following your work there for quite some time. And as you say, the NRA, a lot of the people in charge keep tabs on it because it's sort of got a good pulse on what's going on at the NRA.
I think you're right. So, yeah.
Yeah. So if you would tell us a little bit more, what started, how did you start the blog? How has it evolved over the years? I assume that blog is really what led to your eventual election into the board of directors. So,
I think I would give it a lot of credit.
Yeah.
It got started in 2010. I've been an avid blog reader, especially on 2A blogs. And that was the golden age of blogging. And I said, I think I can do this. And I had a little post here, a little post there, and it started building and building and building. And it just kind of grew over time.
Yeah.
And as other blogs fell by the wayside, I kept going.
I don't remember how I found your blog initially. Did you do anything to promote it, or did you just write and people found your work?
You might have found it because I was also a co-host on the Polite Society podcast.
Okay. There's a good chance of that because I did meet Paul. Actually, I was introduced to Paul, not in person, but he was on Gun Talk with Tom Gresham, talking about an armed defense incident that he was involved in. Yes.
It was Charlie. Riding shotgun with Charlie?
Charlie was here from noon to 3.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yeah, and I'll be here. I'm Alex Dooley.
Hi, I'm Jesse Wright.
Nice to meet you. I'll be here.
Sean Richardson, we're part of the team.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I'll be.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I see that. Very good. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to the family.
Thank you.
We'll be here from 3 to 6 today. The Forge of Freedom podcast. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I met Charlie at the Great American Outdoor Show.
Okay, nice.
And we follow each other on Facebook. And so he said, he says, I know you. And I said, yeah, I know you.
Yeah, Charlie's a great guy. Yeah, but anyway.
Are you with him?
No, we're not affiliated. We're friends, but we're not affiliated in any way. So just.
Can I interrupt?
We're live, but it's okay.
Oh my goodness, I'm so
You're not being recorded, but yes, it's okay. I was glad you stopped by. It was nice to meet you. Yes, thank you. So I bet you're right, though, getting back to the Polite Society, that I found you through the Polite Society podcast.
Probably. And I know and that led to probably around 2015, 2014, I became a speaker on using new media to advance gun rights at the Gun Rights Policy Conference.
Oh, nice.
And I did that for 5, 6, 7 years.
Okay. And Gun Rights Policy Conference, for those who don't know, is an event that's put on by the Second Amendment Foundation.
Yeah.
And it, much like the NRA annual meeting, it moves around to various venues from year to year, but it has a lot of the top experts in the right to keep and bear arms, and particularly the legal aspects of the right to keep and bear arms and litigation at the state level, but also at the federal level as well.
I would say so.
Yeah.
And a lot of Second Amendment scholars in general.
Okay. And so did you get invited to that after you'd started the Only Guns and Money?
Well, I started going to it in 2010 when it was actually held just outside of San Francisco, of all places.
Oh, interesting.
And then I started going as much as I could. 1 year, I got to meet Otis McDonald in 2012. There were a couple years I had to miss. There was one that was going to be in Chicago, and then some guy had a psychotic episode and started cutting all the wires through the radar systems, and so you couldn't get a plane to Chicago if you paid for it.
Yeah.
So, but I started going. I got to know the Gottliebs, and then they started inviting me.
Okay, nice. So, well, that's quite an honor to get to speak at that. That I think sort of solidifies your expertise or your credibility, at least.
And then I think the first year I spoke, it was actually carried live on C-SPAN. So I was like, Wow.
Oh yeah.
I was on C-SPAN.
Nice. Is that still on C-SPAN, or is there a way to find?
I think in the archives you probably could find it.
Okay. All right. Well, if anybody's interested in digging back into the archives on C-SPAN for John Richardson's debut at the GRPC, it's probably there. I want to get back to the NRA a little bit. I made some notes here for our conversation about the election results.
Yes.
Obviously, you won a seat, and there was more or less two camps in the election. There were some who were unaffiliated, but there was the what's called the strong NRA, or some called the old guard.
We'll just call them the old guard.
The old guard.
Called the strong NRA, and then us on the reform side, which we call ourselves NRA 2.0.
Yes.
And we did very, very well. Of the 3-year seats, there were 25 up for election, and we took 17 out of 25. A lot of those people who got elected were first time, who had never served on the board before. And a lot were on the ballot merely by petition, which made it even stronger. So, and then there were a handful of 2-year and 1-year seats, fill-in seats, and we took 2 more of those, and we'll know sometime tomorrow if we took the 76th director. And
the NRA 2.0 group is putting their support behind Charlie Hiltunen.
From
Indiana.
From Indiana?
Yeah, he's the president, I believe, of the Indiana State Rifle and Pistol Association. Yeah. He was previously a board member, did not get elected during the main election.
Exactly right.
But there's still a seat vacant, and who is the strong NRA or the old guard running as their?
As I understand it, it's Tom King.
Okay, Tom King. And Tom King, interestingly, was the man right behind the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association case and the Bruin case. Is that right?
As far as I know. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So those two people are running to fill the final NRA board of directors seat, the 76th seat, and that we'll know the results of that when.
We should know sometime tomorrow afternoon. The voting closes at the close of the meeting of members. So if the meeting goes to noon or the meeting goes to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the votings will stay open, and then sometime after that, we'll know by Sunday morning, no less.
Yeah.
But I would think, all things considered, sometime late tomorrow. And asking the NRA people holding the election this morning, they thought about 500 people had already voted. So that's good news.
That seems like a lot compared to previous elections.
I think it is.
Yeah.
And we've been pushing for people to support Charlie, and I'm sure the old guard has been pushing, to support Tom King, and there are some of the NRA 2.0 candidates, such as Todd Vandermeide and Frank Tate, who unfortunately did not get elected, have stepped aside and said, "We want you to support Charlie."
Yeah, which is admirable that they would step aside like that.
Yeah.
And of course, Frank Tate was on the board previously as well.
Not for long.
Not for long, but he was running as a NRA 2.0 candidate this time around. And I know he was an advocate, and I'd like to get into this a little bit. Well, and before we do, let me back up. So NRA 2.0 won 17 of the 25
17
seats.
of the 25.
And I assume the other seats were won by either strong NRA or unaffiliated.
No, there were no unaffiliated.
No
unaffiliated.
We
were either strong NRA or NRA 2.0.
Okay.
Anybody who what I called was in no man's land, none of them got elected, and they tended to be at the very tip end of the ballot.
Okay. So how does that change the balance of the overall board of directors? So only 25 were up for election. There are 76 total board of directors elected in 3-year cycles,
right,
in 25-person intervals.
I would say that it should, if it doesn't give us a supermajority, we're very close to it, of reformers.
Okay. And of course, we'll get a better sense for that maybe tomorrow at the membership meeting, but certainly Monday,
Monday,
right?
because,
In terms of when the board fills officer positions and other committee positions.
and we're running. And there was a little, I don't want to say controversy, but people wanted to be the candidates for the NRA 2.0, and they worked it out, and they're running a team with Bill Pockenberg, who's first vice president and now for president, Mark Vaughn, who's currently the second vice president, running for first, and then Rocky Marshall would then fill in the position for second vice president.
Okay. So I know one of the things when we were talking about restoring trust in the organization, and I would include myself in this group, a lot of people have been hesitant to donate money to the NRA until they're confident that the NRA has made significant steps toward reform.
Right.
What sorts of priorities do you have, and do some of the other, I know the NRA 2.0 group is not a monolithic group with everybody having the same ideas.
Correct.
But what are some of the priorities that you have and that NRA 2.0 have to restore that trust?
One of the first things that I would like to see is more transparency, rather than the NRA being some sort of black box where money is put in and you might get something out. I will be introducing a resolution tomorrow that will call for the bylaws, board minutes, and a list of the directors being put online. And number one, it's going to save money. But if you want to get bylaws now, you have to print. You have to call in or write in, and they have to mail you a little pamphlet. It'd be so much easier to just keep it as a PDF file online and print up very few copies of it. And the second thing, I think we need to investigate doing live streaming of our board meetings. I mean, look how easy it is for you to do to record a video using a phone and microphones and a laptop. If small towns can do it, there is no excuse for the NRA not to be able to do it. We don't have to have expensive equipment. We could just use YouTube, for lack of a better word, and have it go out on YouTube, which would also give us an archive. If we go into executive session, then you turn off the camera, you go to a screen that says executive session. So it's doable, and I think the more people can see that what the board is doing as opposed to just rumors, so much the better. The other thing is you have committees that meet 3 times a year. When you're dealing with stuff that's important like legislative policy or legal affairs or trying to build membership, meeting 3 times a year just doesn't cut it. And you do not have to go and meet in a location. You can do Zoom, you can do WebEx or anything like that. I can't tell you how many meetings I had using WebEx or Microsoft Teams or Zoom in business with clients during COVID, or even now when we're doing it for our local chapter of Dallas Safari Club. Once a month, and before going into our gala, once a week. But we were doing it on Zoom, and it works. I mean, you can see the other person, you hear them. So there's no excuse of not making it easy and using the technology that's out there. And the other thing is, like I said earlier, we need to show value for your money. What do you get for your $35 or $45? What do you get if you're a life member? Is it just a magazine? Well, you can probably find a deal on guns and ammo, which will be a good article, and what you see in the American Rifleman will probably be just as good. But we need to do more than that. We need to marry that and prove to people that we are fighting for their rights. And that, more than anything to me, given that we are the largest Second Amendment organization, if you put all the other groups, whether it's NACR, the Firearms Policy Coalition, Second Amendment Foundation, anybody who's a member or even an affiliate, it's still less than the NRA. We used to be considered the 800-pound gorilla. We need to be that again. And we're not going to bring people back by always, trying to find a compromise. We're going to have to say, sometimes we're going to have to be hardcore and say, no, we are not compromising. And if you vote against this bill, we are going to report to our members that you voted against this bill, and no, you're not going to get an A rating.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because speaking of other organizations, Firearms Policy Coalition, Second Amendment Foundation, Gun Owners of America, NAGR, etc., as you said, even if you combine all of those, it doesn't match the NRA in terms of its size and its influence, at least the influence that it did have. It's waned a bit in recent years. But hopefully the NRA can get back to that. But even still, in its weakened state, the NRA is much larger than those organizations.
Figures somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 million, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less.
Yeah.
Those are members. Those are not just people on a mailing list.
Yeah.
That's actual members.
As people who pay money to
or
be part
have
of the
paid.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Right. And historically, the NRA has engaged in a bit of sort of a turf war in terms of its influence in the Second Amendment. And I've heard from you and from others I know on the board that the NRA should collaborate with. We're all on the same team in terms of protecting the right to keep and bear arms, and it should be more cooperative with those organizations in terms of fighting against the anti-gun agenda.
I could not agree more. We need to find where we can work together. We may not need to be as in your face sometimes as FPC is on Facebook with
or X,
dropping the F-bombs. I mean, we're not going to be dropping F-bombs.
They don't
even though I
filter their
might say it
content.
privately.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it online.
Yeah.
But there's no reason not to work with them. And especially litigation, we're starting to do it. We need to work with them on more than just litigation. Work, and not just the other major national groups. We need to work with non-affiliated NRA clubs and associations that are fighting for Second Amendment rights at the local and state level. I saw Philip Van Cleave just a moment ago walking by with the Virginia Citizens Defense League. You have the Arizona Citizens Defense League. North Carolina, you have Grassroots North Carolina. We are not NRA affiliated, but we are all fighting for the Second Amendment.
Yeah, and you brought up FPC and their approach on social media. The people who care about the right to keep and bear arms, they fall under a wide tent.
Yes,
right?
we do.
It's a much more diverse group of people than what many outsiders, what many people who perceive the NRA to be, and the people who care about the right to keep and bear arms are. And there's room for lots of different types of people, lots of people who have various preferences, but those various, what we all care about is the right to keep and bear arms.
Absolutely.
And to the extent that we can work together, the better.
I'll be fairly blunt. I think if we start saying that there's a red line that we will not cross, if we show people that we are serious about protecting the Second Amendment, not only will we bring back members, we will bring back younger members, and we desperately need younger members.
Yeah.
We will get members from competition, or they belong to what's called a 100% club, though that, to be honest, a lot of clubs don't even enforce that. I mean, we need members, we need money, but we need members. I mean, the power of the NRA when it comes to lobbying is we can look at a congressman, we can look at a senator and say, we are going to be your margin of victory. We will bring you 2% extra votes, and that may be all you need.
Yeah. The NRA should, and this gets to the theme of the podcast, the Forge of Freedom. The idea is that we preserve our liberty, we preserve our ability to exercise our individual rights from the ground up, from the grassroots, and that we don't get our rights from the top down. They don't come from the government. They don't come from some organization or from some person. They're God-given. They're inherent to our humanity. They're inalienable, and we have to preserve them from the grassroots, from the bottom up. And the NRA needs to get back to that mentality.
And part of it is going to be a culture change. Traditionally, NRA through ILA, Institute for Legislative Action, has worked on relationships and worked behind closed doors. Sometimes you just need to get in the politician's face, and it's like, well, you said nasty things about me. Yeah, and you voted along with the anti-gun people. And I want to say we need to. It's not a conservative or liberal or progressive thing. The Second Amendment is a civil right that we need to protect. And I don't care I don't care if you're gay, I don't care if you're straight, trans, whatever. I don't care if you like abortion, hate abortion. That's not what we're fighting for. We're fighting for the Second Amendment. And we can all support that, even if we don't support other politicians on a personal basis. It doesn't matter. There used to be Second Amendment Democrats, and we need to bring them back.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we can, but we need to.
Speaking of that, I'm going to be talking with your good friend David Yamane here in just a couple of hours.
Yeah.
He describes himself as a liberal sociology professor, but he cares very deeply about the right to keep and bear arms.
He does.
And he strives to show that guns are normal and normal people own guns. And I think he does a great job of trying to bridge the divide between left and right in terms of political ideology, because like you say, this is not about left and right. This is about the right to self-defense, the right to self-preservation, and that's something that all of us have in common.
And David has got we have a book club that David has organized, and right now we're reading a book by a professor at the University of Chicago named Jens Ludwig, and he's trying to make the case for gun control. He hasn't made it yet. But in the group, you have people that are NRA members. You have people that are gun trainers. There's a young lady who's a podcaster for the Brady campaign, and we're all civil. We discuss the book, and there could be things that I'm like, I hate this book. And I'm not going to say this is the worst book I've ever read.
Yeah.
But, we work together. We discuss it rationally, calmly. I know there's a guy that was on it, an older guy, ponytail, beard, NRA member voted for me.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, and I love that book club that David's been doing for it's a number of books by this point that he's organized. Yeah. It's an incredible amount of work, but I think extremely valuable for the people who participate.
And what we tend to do is every 2 weeks read X number of chapters, and on the fourth we finish up the book, and we're lucky, and we have been, the author comes on and can ask questions.
Yeah.
Or we ask questions of the author.
Yeah.
And it's like, why did you write this? And tell me about your grandmother's gun, and, stuff like that.
Yeah, neat. One comment you made earlier, and I think is an important point, that a lot of people have concerns about with respect to the NRA. FPC, and GOA, for instance, sort of fashioned themselves as the no compromise gun organizations, gun rights organizations, individual rights organizations.
Exactly.
And, for a while, the NRA sort of had this reputation of being willing to compromise, being willing to give up something so that something worse doesn't happen. For instance, the bump stock ban. And there are others, of course, other examples. Has there been any discussion amongst the NRA 2.0 group about what sort of approach the NRA should take with respect to the right to keep and bear arms? Because I understand that lobbying and getting the votes required in Congress is sometimes a tricky issue, but does it necessarily mean that we have to compromise on the right to keep and bear arms?
That's a good point. Yesterday, I attended the Legislative Policy Committee, and Jeff Knox, who is part of the reform movement, absolutely brought up a resolution that said, here are our stated goals, our mission and what we believe in. We need to stop. If you work for the NRA and you start negotiating on to reduce any of these rights, you need to stop it, or you may need to find a job elsewhere. Now, I think it was pretty polemic, but most of us agreed, whether we were more the old guard or the more hardcore reformers, that we have a mission statement and we need to help preserve some of what we say we stand for. And that was part of it.
Yeah. And the other component to that, I mentioned the bump stock ban. One thing, I'll just give an example from Indiana. You mentioned the grades that the NRA gives to politicians. They do that, and it's been an incredible resource, especially at the state level. So you could get a barometer on what position certain politicians took with respect to the right to keep and bear arms. The problem that in the way that it was implemented, at least in Indiana, is that you could have these Republicans who would express publicly support for the right to keep and bear arms, but then through the legislative process would avoid bringing an issue to a vote publicly and try to kill legislation behind closed doors in committee. And
Yep.
That would not be considered as part of the NRA's grade. So that way they could keep their A rating with the NRA. Yeah. They could keep their A rating with the NRA,
Yeah.
but nevertheless vote against or work against the right to keep and bear arms behind closed doors.
And I think you find that in every state, unfortunately. And especially in states where, let's say, there's a strong Republican majority, they're gonna mouth the platitudes that, oh, I support the Second Amendment. I'm a hunter,
Yeah.
which we all know that Second Amendment isn't about deer or duck hunting, though they're
Right.
very important, but it's not about that.
Yeah.
It's about preserving our right to keep and bear arms in facing a tyrannical government.
Yes.
Hopefully we'll never get, it's like, well, I'm going to bury my guns. Like, if it's time to bury your guns, it's time to
use them. Yeah.
Time to use them.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's hard. The leaders now of ILA are all younger. I would put them 40 and younger, but a lot of them came up when they were trained on how to negotiate. And like I said, it's hard to change a culture,
But
a corporate culture.
the problem that lots of people see, as I know you do too, is that when you compromise, it's sort of death by 1,000 cuts. Yeah, and we lose our rights little by little. And I like Tom Gresham's just sitting across the aisle here from us with Gun Talk. The way he puts it on his radio show is that, okay, we'll compromise. Which gun laws do you want to get rid of? We have way too many.
I mean, and I remember picking up a T-shirt at some NRA meeting that was a group that was trying to make changes called NRA Not Really Activists, and there was more truth than fiction to that.
Yeah. Well, John, I really appreciate you taking the time to stop by.
Thank you.
We've got another guest on the way, and I want to give you an opportunity here at the end. Plug your blog one more time, because I know that'll change a little bit since you've been elected, but you're still going to keep it active, right?
I will still keep it active. I will, in order to do my fiduciary duties, my duty of care, obedience, and loyalty to the NRA as a board member, there are certain things I'm not going to be able to report on. If I get confidential information, it's got to stay confidential. In the past, if somebody slipped it to me and it became public domain, I had no problem going with it. Now I'm kind of constrained. It is what it is. And I know that's not going to make certain people happy, but I had preached fiduciary duties for too long to step away from it.
Yeah. Well, we haven't lost your valuable resource of Only Guns and Money
No,
So
no,
you're
no.
you're going to continue to contribute. You'll just be somewhat limited by what you can report on there.
I mean, I can still report on litigation going on in the courts. I can still report on what's going on in the firearms industry. For example, I just did a story beginning of the week about one of the smaller AR manufacturers closing its doors because they couldn't compete on price anymore. So, I mean, stuff like that's not going to go away. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, John, thanks again for stopping by. Again, everybody, John Richardson, man behind onlygunsandmoney.com,
Yep.
and newly elected
Newly
member of the board of directors.
I'm a director-elect until I become a director tomorrow.
That's right. Okay. All right. Well, tomorrow's the official day. So
the official
congratulations and thanks
Thank
again.
you very much.
It was good to see you, John.
You too.
All right, everybody. I'm going to put this on pause, on mute for just a moment, and we'll be on with David Conte here in just a little bit. All right, everybody, we're back. I've got David Conte here in the booth with me. David is you've been working with the NRA-ILA for quite some time now. If you would please just give people a little background about who you are, how you got involved with the NRA, and what you do for NRA-ILA.
Sure. So I've been working for NRA-ILA since 2010, and before 2010, I was volunteering on a race in Virginia, and met some of the reps from the NRA. And the following year, they said, "We like what you do. Please, interview with us." And got hired on, and that's been the last 15 years. So
Yeah.
bouncing around the United States, and I think the last time I saw you, I only had a couple states, and now it's kind of grown.
Okay.
So I cover Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, and Tennessee now.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I believe I don't remember which two states it was when we last met, but we met actually.
Yep.
You may remember this. We met at a firearms dealer in Seymour, Indiana, called
Yep.
Bite the Bullet.
Yep.
And I don't remember what was going on that day, but there was a special event, and you were there promoting NRA-ILA. So.
Yeah. So that event there was the NRA Second Amendment Day, or NRA 2A Day event that we do at gun stores. Doesn't necessarily have to be at gun stores, but each year we do several hundred. I think last year we did 200, mainly focused on supporting candidates that we endorsed. So in those battleground areas across the United States. This year we have a goal of 250 of those.
Oh wow!
Across the United States.
Okay, great. How many in the region that you are part of?
So my personal goal this year is between 60 and 70.
Oh wow!
Of those.
Okay, great.
Which we'll probably do about a quarter of those in Indiana.
Okay, excellent. Well, I actually asked you to come onto the podcast. I've been receiving your emails for all these years since that event in Seymour, and I follow your emails, and I received the email. I'm looking at it now. It was from April 1st, and it's about the event called the NRA and You that will be taking place. Is that tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay, and tell us a little bit about what that event will entail.
So this is something that I came up with, kicking around actually for the last couple of years, and even for some of our biggest supporters. There's a lot of people out there that don't understand the history of the NRA or the full scope of the National Rifle Association. So this presentation goes through the history, from our founding to present day, and then it goes through the structure of the NRA, going through all the different divisions, some of our successes from 2024, and then at the end gives some opportunities for people to how they can, volunteer with the NRA.
If you would, talk a little bit about the NRA-ILA, which is the Institute for Legislative Action, right? But the NRA, and I think that a lot of times the people who don't like the NRA, right, they really don't like the NRA-ILA component because, right, they're the ones that are involved in D.C. and get behind all the legislative change. So talk a little bit about ILA, but also, if you would, a little bit about what else the NRA has going.
Sure. So NRA-ILA was founded or created in 1975, really as a direct response to a lot of the different gun control legislation that was passing, in the 70s and the 60s. So we're the only national organization that has lobbyists for all 50 states. We also have a separate team of federal lobbyists in Washington, D.C. That works with, U.S. House, U.S. Senate, and of course, the President of the United States, which this president, takes our phone calls. Biden, not so much. So within ILA, we have several different departments. So of course, we have the legislative side, litigation side, and then we have the grassroots side, and then what my job in our department is, we go out and educate people on what's going on legislatively, litigation-wise, and then also elections. What makes NRA-ILA very unique is we're the only ones nationwide that actually field staff across the United States in battleground areas to raise an army of volunteers using very sophisticated technology and data, just like a presidential campaign would, to reach out to gun owners, educate them on the issues, and then get them out to vote.
Yeah, and that's partly where NRA's influence comes from at DC, is that you can take that data that you collect, right, to politicians and say, this is the information we have about our voting base and what sort of votes we can bring to you, right, if you get behind this certain piece of legislation. Right?
Absolutely. We are only as strong as our membership. And then, once we get on the ground, we're able to go beyond our membership, to gun owners nationwide and, communicate and talk with them. ILA, when I do events, I'm not just communicating to our membership. We also have a separate database of non-members, invite them out to events, educate them on legislation that's, happening. So it's a very broad, group of people that we can communicate with.
And you mentioned the NRA-ILA is the only organization with grassroots sort of efforts in all 50 states.
Correct.
And that you've got this influence not just with the membership, which I think is an important point. There are only there are, through my understanding, between 3 and 4 million members of the NRA currently, and that's actually a fairly small percentage of gun owners, right? Even though the NRA is a very large organization, lots of members, it still represents a very small percentage of total gun ownership. So what sorts of things do you do to reach out to non-members?
Well, so last year, I mentioned that Pennsylvania is one of my states, and certainly probably one of the most crucial battleground states for the election last year. I was going into, the inner cities, into, minority churches, talking to individuals that are gun owners, but they don't belong to any organizations, helping them connect the dots between ownership, personal safety, and then who they vote for, and how who they vote for directly impacts, that capability of owning a firearm and also protecting themselves. Pennsylvania has, close to 500,000 hunters that weren't even registered to vote as of the beginning of last year. So between us and another group called Hunter Nation, Ted Nugent's group, we were able to message to that 500,000 and get about a little over 150,000 of them educated, registered to vote, and then turn them out to vote come election day.
Yeah, wow. So let's talk a little bit more, if we can, about the NRA and you. You mentioned that part of the presentation, the seminar, is going to be about the history of the NRA. Can you talk a little bit about the history and some of the misconceptions about the NRA and its sort of core functions and what it stems from?
Sure. So, the NRA, was created or founded right after the Civil War. And it was by, two Union officers that saw, a great need for marksmanship in America. So the Union forces greatly underperformed Southern forces when it came to, marksmanship. So right after that, we were founded in, New York in 1871. And our first range was Creedmoor Range. And, it just kind of went from there. And then we started, setting up collegiate clubs across the United States and bringing that education of, training, marksmanship, and education, across the United States. And I think, some of the misconceptions is everybody thinks of the NRA as, like the lobbying arm. But, NRA-ILA is actually a very small component of the NRA. The biggest part is training, education, and competitions. So we're involved with, Olympics. We're involved with, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, 4-H, Uh, so it, kind of spans the spectrum, new and old. Um, People have this, image of, uh, won't speak about myself being bald, but, elderly, bald, gray,
Yeah.
individuals. But, a lot of our programs, we're going into, elementary schools, teaching little kids, not to touch, firearms,
Yeah.
through the NRA-ILA program.
Right.
Now we have a very modernized, AR education uh, and competition program, actually in Camp Atterbury,
Right.
there in Indiana. And it's kind of morphed over the years. Our history, growing with the times. Um, but with that core value of training, education, and competitions, and then later on, of course, what we do with the lobbying component.
Yeah. My family and I, my brother and my parents, we've been NRA instructors for over a decade now, and that's one of the things that we always tell people that take our class, even though it's not essential to the class, to the basic handgun class or whatever class it is that the NRA was founded as a training organization.
Right.
And it still carries on that legacy, that focus as a training organization today, has thousands of instructors around the country.
I believe it's over 100,000.
Yeah. That teach people the essentials of basic marksmanship, gun handling, and gun safety, and really the foundation of responsible gun ownership and responsible armed citizenship. So I think the NRA has been essential to that, to sort of cultivating that culture in the United States since the end of the Civil War, essentially.
144 years.
Yeah. And the NRA still does that today. As a matter of fact, I'll be talking with John Howard later today, who's the training director at NRA. So we'll get into more detail with him about that. So with the NRA and you seminar, will you be speaking at that tomorrow? Or?
Yes.
Okay, great. And I don't want to give away too many of the punchlines for that. So you'll be talking about the history.
Mm-hmm.
What else will you be talking about tomorrow?
History, major events in history that have kind of shaped, the NRA, the structure of the NRA. Most, NRA members and people on the outside, their only connections with the NRA, maybe it's ILA, maybe it's Friends of the NRA with their banquets. So going over the complete structure of the organizations to kind of help everybody understand that there's so much more out there for them to get involved with. And then we're going to have a quiz, so people won't, have the opportunity to fall asleep. So we'll do a quiz, hand out some, some hats, T-shirts, of course, and then at the end, kind of educate people on how they can get more involved locally.
Okay.
So, in Indiana, we're bringing on board a lot of frontlines activist leaders. These are volunteers that are kind of like super volunteers to help host events, like the one that you went to at Bite the Bullet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. And I want to talk a little bit about the Friends of the NRA as well, because I actually just went to one recently in southern Indiana. It's the largest one in the country.
Correct.
It's the what is it? It's the Friends of the NRA. It's the Ohio Valley, or I can't remember
Yeah, I think it's the Ohio Valley banquet.
Yeah, I can't remember the whole name of it, but it's at Huber's. It's Starlight, Indiana, and over 1,000 people in attendance. But what's so great about it is that event is designed to raise money for youth shooting sports.
Correct.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about what the money that's raised through those types of events goes to?
Sure. So the money that's raised, 50% of it stays in state in Indiana. The other 50% goes towards national programs, such as like Eddie Eagle, School Shield, Community Shield. There's a few other education programs there as well. But, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, 4-H, they can apply for grants through the foundation to get, money for firearms, range development grants, if they need to, upgrade their ranges. So
Nice.
it's a wonderful program. Uh, I don't have the numbers on the top of my head because I don't work for that division, but they've donated, millions and millions of dollars through the grant program.
Yeah, it's always a fantastic event, and there are hundreds of those types of events throughout the country, I assume.
Yeah, there's, I think last year they did north of over 500 events nationwide.
Yeah, wow. So raised lots of money that's utilized for a great purpose,
Right.
cultivating that responsible gun ownership, gun safety at a young age. You may or may not have seen this, but as a response, or partly as a response to the war in Ukraine, the Polish government and the schools in Poland have started to institute marksmanship programs in their schools. And it's become, I think they can opt out of it in some ways, but they want to cultivate that, what's incorporated in the Second Amendment is that, a well-regulated militia, which is not what lots of people think it means, but what the essence of it is that we want the people to be able to not only protect themselves and the country against foreign invaders, but against a tyrannical government.
Right.
And I think that I was glad to see that in Poland, but I think that the NRA and through programs like the Friends of the NRA, you sort of cultivate that mentality at a young age, and it's not a mentality of fear, right? It's a mentality of preparedness and responsibility.
Right. Yeah. My wife and I got married a couple of years ago, and we actually went on our honeymoon in Poland.
Oh, nice.
And I remember at our hotel, the guy at the front desk, said, are you American? And gave us a brochure on a local gun range to, I think it was, $50 to shoot 50 rounds from an AK-47.
Oh, wow.
We spent some time in Eastern Europe, and a lot of those countries get it.
Yeah.
Slovakia, they have for many years, they've been a lot of concealed carry over there, but most of those countries don't have a concept of personal protection. You do not have a right to protect yourself. So I was very happy to see Poland, and they got a lot of troops along that border, pointing towards, Russia, and they're starting to get it. So they're starting to incorporate, some new programs because I think they have the least out of all of the NATO countries and the EU, they have the lowest gun ownership than everybody else there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so
that's surprising, actually.
Yeah, so the mentality hasn't been there, and so I was very happy to see them roll out these programs. And I won't spill the beans, but we are working on some programs for some other European countries.
Oh, neat.
So that'll come to light here later this year.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll keep an eye out for that. I assume.
Absolutely.
Well, speaking of that, where can people follow? What's the best resource for people to follow in terms of what the NRA-ILA is doing and to get updates about things like that?
Sure. Well, first place they can go is NRAILA.org, and there is a treasure trove of information from past and current information. But if you go on to NRAILAfrontlines.com, you can sign up to get our grassroots alerts, and those are all tailored for your particular state. And we'll keep you updated on local events. Of course, if there's any legislation going on in your state, we'll keep you informed there as well.
Okay, excellent. And I'm pulling up the NRA-ILA Frontlines.
So if you just click on
website,
get involved there.
I'm going to share the screen so folks can see what we're looking at here. All right, and yeah, okay. So get involved.
Yep. Get involved there.
And will you volunteer? Okay. So then you say what you're willing to do.
Right.
And what sorts of information you want.
Now, you're not signing up for the military there. It's not anything like that, but you're just letting us know what you're interested in doing.
Okay.
And, one of our staff, either myself, if it's Indiana, reach out let you know what the opportunities are,
Okay.
and just kind of take that, build that relationship from there.
And this does not require membership, I assume?
No, it does not.
Okay. So anybody who wants to get involved can get involved, and
Correct.
if they decide they want to become a member later, they can do that later.
Membership needs to be earned.
Yeah.
That trust needs to be earned. And signing up with Frontlines is a great opportunity to kind of see, what NRA-ILA does.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, David, I really appreciate you taking the time to stop by the booth today to talk about NRA-ILA and what you're up to. And you said 15 years you've been doing
Yep.
this? Yeah, 15
since
years. Well,
2010.
thanks a lot for all your efforts. I know Indiana, I can't speak for the rest of your region. I know Indiana has been relatively gun friendly, and with the exception of our red flag law, although it's not as bad as some others, but
Right.
all of them are bad in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And so I appreciate the efforts you've made in Indiana and elsewhere, and I hope the event goes well tomorrow. If anybody is here in Atlanta, check out the NRA and U event tomorrow. What time is it tomorrow?
It is
2 o'clock, I think.
2 o'clock. Yes.
2 o'clock, and that'll be here at the NRA annual meeting in Atlanta. Will there be any recording or way for people to see that after the fact?
I don't believe that particular
Okay.
event is going to be
Okay, I know
recorded.
some of them are, but not
Yeah.
all of them. So, all right. Well, thanks a bunch for stopping by, and it was
Absolutely.
great chatting with you.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. All right, everybody, I'm going to hit the mute button here for a minute, and we'll be ready for our next guest here in just a little bit. All right, everybody, we will have a little bit of a break here between David Conte and David Yamane, who's coming on the show. We've got two Johns and two Davids today, so it was the John and David day. David Yamane is coming back on the show. He was on the podcast previously to talk about a chapter of his book, Gun Curious, and we're talking about being responsibly armed. So if you're interested in that, go back and check that out. You can search for that at forageoffreedom.com. Search for David or Yamane, and Yamane is spelled Yamane. David is a sociology professor, self-described liberal sociology professor at Wake Forest, and he runs a blog, Gun Culture 2.0, and now a Substack called Light Over Heat. And he wrote a book called Gun Curious, which I highly recommend that people read. But his part of his work is to establish that guns are normal and normal people own guns. And it's really sort of this bridge between, people who are normally anti-gun and people who are pro-gun, because oftentimes there's lots of rhetoric, very little conversation, and he has spent a tremendous amount of effort trying to bridge that divide. So I'll be on here with David Yamane in just a little bit, in about 10 minutes. So Mike's actually stepping into the booth here, so we might just chat with him a little bit and see what he's been walking around the show floor, I believe, and we will see what he has discovered, if anything.
Actually, I haven't been walking around too much. I've already walked around too much, so I was sitting down resting.
Okay.
These older bones. Do you have another microphone for David?
I do.
And I have my computer. And we're going to put David between us, or
I will move the suitcase, and yeah.
You can see we're doing this on the fly.
Yeah, we don't have much space here, and we don't have time beforehand to set up, so we have to make do with what we've got.
You get to see the sausage being made, so to speak.
Exactly.
But I'm ready to talk about
unitary executive
authority. Actually, looking forward to it.
All right, everybody, we are back. We're live on for those who are looking for us. We're live on YouTube and Facebook. I've posted the links at Facebook and at forgeoffreedom.com. And as you can see, if you're watching already, we are here with David Yamane, who is, of course, professor of sociology at Wake Forest. Was actually recently on the Forge of Freedom podcast to talk about his book, Gun Curious, specifically one chapter. It was chapter 8 of Gun Curious, about being responsibly armed. David, it's great to see you in person and to be back to chat with you again.
Yeah, thanks so much, and great to see you again and to have a chance to chat with you this time. And this is what an amazing setup this is that the NRA has done for people to live broadcast from the show.
We've had a great time so far, and we certainly appreciate you coming by. We know your time is great demand.
Yeah.
So,
That's questionable, but I appreciate you having me.
Well, you have in previous years on a number of occasions spoken during the lunch at the NRA legal seminar that's on Fridays. And that's actually how we became acquainted with your work. You spoke at the luncheon during the NRA legal seminar in 2019 in Indianapolis. And you introduced us to the concept of gun culture 2.0. You still have that blog, I know, Gun Culture 2.0. You wrote the book Gun Curious, and you're now shifting priorities to your Light Over Heat project, which I know you have got a Substack and a YouTube channel for that. But one of the articles that I came across, and the impetus behind inviting you to the studio here, or to the booth, I should say, is to talk about what you're looking for here at the NRA annual meeting. I know that you're sort of here with eyes wide open, and you're in this transitionary period in your work. What are you looking for, if anything in particular, and what have you seen so far today in your time here?
Yeah. Well, just very brief background, I started my work in about 2011, published my book Gun Curious in 2024. So that was 13 years of sort of journeying through gun culture and trying to learn as much as I could, and really a lot of focus on my own journey and also on gun culture 2.0, so defensive gun culture. And with that book kind of behind me, I told myself I'll spend a year promoting the book and doing some summary kind of projects and essays. But now it's been a year, and so I can't just sit back and reflect for the rest of my life. So really, thinking about what's the next stage, how do I continue my work on guns? Do I, keep pressing on with the gun culture 2.0 concept? Do I work more in sort of trying to foster dialogue between gun rights advocates and gun violence prevention advocates? Or I've actually become pretty interested in some of these gun culture 1.0 pursuits of, I went hunting for the first time. I noticed
that you went hunting.
January, I had an amazing time. I'm going to talk to the Smith & Wesson Collectors Association in June at their national meeting. So kind of getting the collecting, and certainly, recreational and sport shooting is a huge part of gun culture. So I'm almost thinking about backfilling and, getting a true full spectrum picture of gun culture.
I noted in something I read of yours that there was some discipline required for you to take that step to go hunting, because there was some inhibition on your part to do the hunting thing. What was your experience like there? What was different? What did you learn? What was different about that?
Yeah, no, lots of people as I got into guns were like, oh, we should go hunting, I'll take you hunting. And I was always kind of like, oh, thanks. I have to really explore what I'm doing right now. And I was, I really honestly didn't know how I would feel shooting an animal. I certainly, anything that is, any kind of meat, I will eat. Game meat, birds, anything, any mammal. Except humans. But there's that part of me I've never, killed a living being before. And so I had a little reluctance, but I thought it's a basic hypocrisy to, eat meat, but not be willing to kill for your own food. So it just by happenstance, I was going to a conference in Arizona, and this guy who was an organizer just wrote to me and said, hey, if you're getting in early enough, I'd love to take you quail hunting. And I was like, for some reason, my instant response was just, yes, absolutely, let's do this. Went out, spent a couple hours in the Arizona brush and desert, every bush there kind of attacks you, like the thorns and other things, and never got a good look at any of the quail because it was late season. I think only the smart ones were still alive, and they're very elusive. This Gambel's quail, always like flushing behind you to the side, and I just had no idea what I was even looking at. I don't know if you all hunt, but if you don't hunt, you don't know what you're listening for. You don't know what you're looking for.
Well, I really appreciate the dogs. When I quail hunted or pheasant hunted, it's the dogs that I really enjoy. The training of the dogs and how they perform.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't want to take up too much time, but so after we were doing the quails, we went to look for some ducks that live. They hang out in these basically reservoirs for the irrigation reservoirs. So kind of sneak up on them. The guy really wanted me to kill something that day, and so set me up perfectly for a duck. It's about 7 yards away. Flock comes up. I come up with the gun. I take a shot. Nothing falls. I take another shot. Nothing falls. I'm like, how did I just miss 7 ducks from 7 yards away with a shotgun?
Yeah, it's called adrenaline.
I was like, I couldn't believe I missed. And he was so disappointed that he was like, I couldn't have set it up for you any better.
There'll be
But
another one.
I had an amazing time. They got some ducks, and one of them got a quail. So I was like, I interacted with the dead animal, and I felt like, okay, I can do this. So
nice.
I'm definitely looking forward to the next opportunity to go hunting.
Excellent. I know Alex had just talked to David Conte about the NRA-ILA, what they're doing, what they have done, what they want to do, and I know that's one of your concerns about how we effectuate these changes or how they're happening within the government.
Yeah. Well, and before we get to that, I want to stick to the hunting point one more time. I didn't actually realize that you'd just gone hunting. I see the southern accent coming out. It was appropriate, right? We're in Georgia. Hunting recently.
Yeah.
But that seems appropriate because one of the stories you tell is about when you and Sandy met. You saw what was it out in the deer stand?
I
love that story.
Yeah, can you tell that story just real quickly?
Yeah, so I grew up completely outside of gun culture in California, and then just had this blue bubble of sociology and higher education surrounding me. So when it wasn't until I moved to North Carolina, I started to realize that guns existed, but I still didn't know anything about the culture. And so my wife, Sandy, who grew up in the most redneck town in all of North Carolina, we're driving along the highway one time, and I just looked out in this cornfield, and I saw this square, looked like a tree house on 4 legs, the ladder. And I said, Sandy, why would anybody put a fort out in a cornfield? And she looked at me, honestly, like I was from another planet. And she said, that's a deer stand.
Yeah.
And then she had to proceed to explain to me what a deer stand was for. So that's where I was coming from in terms of not knowing anything about guns, gun culture, or hunting.
I tell that story often. I attribute it to you. I don't know if I should, if you want me to or not, but I do attribute it to you. And I tell that story because I think I really enjoy the story.
Well, and of course, your journey in gun culture is not over, but I thought that your recent hunting experience, your first hunting experience, sort of bookended your current journey so far, at least.
Yeah. I start the book talking about how I was out with my friends and shooting BB guns, and I shot a bird that I didn't think was possible that I could even hit, and that. The feeling I had there, I'm sure, just stayed with me because I was like, I didn't intend to kill the bird.
Yeah.
And so, my reservation about hunting, I think, was pretty deep.
Yeah, right. Well, you are a self-described liberal sociology professor. And as we've alluded to so far, you've been working on this gun culture 2.0 idea, have blogged about it a lot, written about it a lot. Written a book, Gun Curious. It's sort of the culmination of those efforts. And you started this project, Light Over Heat. And one of the things, at least my perception of it, and I'll have you describe it, is that you're trying to bridge the divide that's often just filled with rhetoric, in terms of people who are in favor of gun ownership and gun use and those who are not.
Yeah.
Right. And I think you do a fantastic job of doing that. You try to bring light to those conversations rather than heat to those conversations. Yeah. Is that the idea behind Light Over Heat, or is there something else to it?
Yeah, no, I was I've been blogging for a long time, and I really enjoyed blogging, but blogging has seen better days in terms of readership, and so I was trying to continue to reach audiences, and I did feel like I'm have this interesting position of spending 42 years of my life outside of gun culture and 12 years of my life deeply involved, and sort of seeing kind of both sides. Like, I understand why people don't like guns or don't know anything about guns, and I understand why people put a lot of faith in guns and a lot of enjoyment. So I was trying to think, like, how can I act as a sort of mediator between these sides that too often I think just yell at each other. And when I was thinking about launching a YouTube channel, I was talking to John Correa, who's a pretty good person to consult with if you want to try and figure out how to launch a YouTube channel. But he really pressed me, like, what's your mission? What are you trying to accomplish? Like, you're not just putting out videos for the sake of putting out videos. And so I was really thinking, like, what am I about? Like, well, really promoting light, enlightenment ideas, bringing light to the issue over the heat of argument. And not that there's anything wrong with passion, right? But if it's destructive and not constructive, then I thought that was the issue. So that's where I kind of went with that and that brand. And then that also allows me to kind of talk about other things as well. If someday I don't want to talk about guns, then the brand is not completely tied to that. And I think that's sort of my disposition is trying to get along, trying to understand people that are different from me, and have empathy, and curiosity, really.
And you and I, in terms of branding, we're looking for similar things. But when I was thinking about how to cast this podcast, The Forge of Freedom, I wanted to capture more than just ideas about guns, and so that's where the Forge of Freedom idea comes from. And that the idea is that, of course, that our rights, our liberties are cultivated from the ground up. They don't come from the government. They don't come from some authority, some human authority at least. And so anyway, I like the light over heat concept, because it also captures this, what I think you say a lot is, you're trying to show that guns are normal and normal people own guns. But I think that message is really for the people who have been at least anti-gun to some degree.
Yes.
But I think your work also does a great job showing people who are already ingrained in gun culture what those people are concerned about. So I think it goes both ways, and trying to foster that conversation. And speaking of that, I came across an article that we want to get into a little bit from your Substack, and I'm going to put that on the screen here so folks can see your Substack. But the article is called "What Am I So Worried About?" And so I want to try to shed some light on what you're worried about, rather than heat, and see if we can foster some common ground here, some conversation. So let me put this article up on the screen. So again, it's Light Over Heat with Professor David Yamane. It's lightoverheat.substack.com. You've been writing there for, when did you launch the Substack?
Oh, just the spring.
So
just a couple months ago.
It's a relatively new project, and so if you're not familiar with it, definitely go check that out. Subscribe so you get an email newsletter, a notification, and follow his writing there. But you start out, you mentioned that you were speaking with two friends, one a Christian conservative, one a libertarian, and you expressed that you had some worry about the way that the Trump administration was going about business, so to speak. And they wondered, why are you so worried? Because these are two people who at least believe that, in theory, that smaller government is better government. Right. And so insofar as Trump's efforts are achieving that end, that who cares what the means are? And I'm paraphrasing. I don't know if that's exactly what they said, but so you wrote this article sort of in response to that interaction, that commentary. Can you tell us what you mean? What are you worried about?
Well, and I hope that that essay was written in the same spirit of Light Over Heat, in the sense that these are two people that I consider friends, right? And they think they're asking me what I was worried about was an expression of their concern because they could see that I was, upset and in some distress about the way things were happening in these first couple of months of the Trump administration, and so I wanted to respond, to their concerns, and also to recognize that their concerns may not be my concerns, and that we can differ about whether this is good or bad. But at least I wanted to outline my concern, and so I think a lot of my concerns really revolve around sort of dismantling of the state, for lack of a better word, the federal bureaucracy, but then also at the same time consolidating power around the president. And so I talk about this unitary executive theory, right? Which I've gotten a lot of response to that, which is basically saying that's just what the Constitution says. And I'm like, okay, well, if we could all just read the Constitution, then there wouldn't be a need for any court system to tell us what the Constitution actually says. And what we think the Constitution says changes over time. I mean, look at gun rights, right? I mean, what we thought the Constitution said on gun rights is not what we currently think. So the way the consolidation of power around the president, and also sort of eliminating checks on that, the fact that I think Congress hasn't really stepped up to do its job as, the Article 1 branch of government.
Which is not a new development, right?
No.
I mean, that we have seen that sort of deference or delegation of authority for quite some time, really.
Yeah.
But I think that you're right. We're still seeing it even with the current administration, maybe even more so in some ways.
Yeah. So this is, I think, a question, and I think people have, pushed back friendly way, or, just engaging in dialogue with me to say like, hey, guess what? This has been happening for some time. This is not new. And, in part I have to plead guilty because, I've been busy doing other things. I haven't really, been paying much attention. It also hasn't hit me at home as much as this currently has with some of the defunding of federal higher education. But I think for me, it still seems sort of qualitatively different, even though, you go back and see Jimmy Carter signed lots of executive orders, right? Bill Clinton signed lots of executive orders. So, there's some dynamics that are like a trend, but then it just feels to me, and maybe inappropriately, that there's been a qualitative shift since Trump was inaugurated.
Well, I like it. Go ahead.
It's kind of interesting because I've had similar experiences to yours of late with colleagues of mine, for instance. And I've had some uneasiness as well with regard to executive power. But I'm in the learning stage still. I'm an attorney. I can read the Constitution. But I'm sort of in the learning stage, and that's why I'm so interested in hearing what you have to say about this, because, sometimes we talk about the 4 stages of learning. I think I'm in the conscious incompetence area when we talk about the unitary executive power, because I think you're right. It's clear, and I've got the concept, brought it up in front of me. I mean, the vesting clause clearly puts executive authority in the president, but there can be a debate, and reasonable people can disagree about how strong that executive authority can be. Yeah. Is it minimalist or is it maximal? Yeah. And that's, I think, where most people are at.
The power is vested in the president, but only pursuant to the executive powers, to the powers that are vested in the president by the Constitution, right? But part of it, and one of the things that I like the way you described it, and this gets back to your qualitative point. You said Donald Trump was sworn in as president of the United States and began acting at muzzle velocity to flood the zone with executive orders and action. And I think that's partly what you're getting at, right, when you're talking about the qualitative and the quantitative, speed and number of executive orders that he's issued. But one of the things, as I was reading your article, and I want to drill down on this, is because I think we have common ground here in terms of what is the role of government, because you talk about sharing concern about the national deficit, the debt, and the burden that has. What is the role of the president? And you talk about how the ends don't justify the means. So if you would unpack what you mean by that and how you view the role of government versus what you're concerned about with President Trump's executive actions.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that, we either need to be taking in more money or spending less money or both, right? I mean, that's something that I think we can all agree on. It's, how do we get to that point? And, is going in and saying we're basically going to shut down the Department of Education. I'm going to defund all of this research that's being done by the National Institute of the Humanities, and the Musk proudly wielding the chainsaw. That I just feel like this is not the ideal way to accomplish this goal of reducing that federal debt. And so,
how do you respond to the critique? And I know you've thought about this, that Congress has taken no action toward this. They appear to have no desire to reduce the federal deficit. So if President Trump doesn't do it, who's going to do it, and who's going to prevent the collapse of our our democratic republic?
Yeah, no, I don't have the answer to that question. I think if we had that answer, then it would be a lot easier to move forward. I think that we see, even with what the president is doing, people are all trying to find their carve out, right? Like all of a sudden, your congressman's like, wait, we're going to lose what? We're going to lose our VA hospital? Like, whoa, this is getting a little bit too far. And so, I think that whole issue is just endemic on both sides of the aisle, really. And I don't know the answer, but I feel like he could have accomplished some of the same goals by moving more deliberately, and not, we're going to lay off these employees. Oh, they do nuclear security. Sorry. Come on back. And I think also, maybe the liberal in me is like, federal civil servants have certain job rights, right? And you can't just come in and say you're fired and make up you're being fired for cause, when that's just clearly not true. And so the other part of this sort of worry has to do with the due process. That I think that people have rights, whether we're talking about immigration, deportation, whether you can be fired from your job or not. I had a student of mine who worked for the U.S. Institute of Peace, which is not even part of the executive branch. And the Musk went in with some law enforcement officers, took over the building, and fired all the employees. And I'm like, how is that even happening? So I think that's where, like, the centralization of power, if it means less due process, that's also a worry.
Let me go ahead.
One of the things that I think about, to try to examine, am I too worried about some things? I mean, worry most of the time, and I'm not a psychologist.
Neither am I.
Yeah. But one of the problems with worry, I think, is that we have worries about whatever it is, and statistically, the probabilities of those bad things coming to fruition is phenomenally low. So sometimes I wonder if I worry too much about the minutia of what degree of due process we need to apply to a particular situation, or what degree of unitary power does the president have. Am I worrying too much about it?
Yeah. Well, I'm there's similarities. I'm a very risk-averse person.
Yeah.
When I think about, what's the likelihood that I'm going to need a gun to defend myself, it's extremely low, given my lifestyle. I see John Farnham's right across the way, so don't go stupid places and do stupid things with stupid people. And, that works a lot of the time. And, so I think some of that, that thinking about what's the worst that can happen, that maybe comes a little more natural to me. I had, lunch with a good friend just today because he was worried about me being so worried. And he said, you know what, it's going to be fine. It'll be fine.
Well, I think that happens to an academic. And also I think we suffer from that somewhat as attorneys as well, that we worry about things that maybe we are overreacting sometimes. I don't know.
I don't know.
It's a question, not an answer.
I terms of worry, coming back to the due process issue, and I get a lot of flack from, because I consider myself to be a libertarian, and I get a lot of flack from Trump supporters about some of my commentary. But I'm also concerned about due process because, well, just think about guns for a moment. There's this famous clip of him where he says, take the guns now and due process later, referring to red flag laws and emergency risk protection orders. But then more recently, with the immigration debate, it's another issue where due process has been at the forefront. People are like, well, they're here illegally. And I said, well, the Constitution doesn't say that it has to be a citizen, that, it says person. And I caution the people who are for that person's deportation against being so cavalier about due process, because the Constitution requires it, but it also, by just deporting the person, for instance, you're also basically saying that if you're okay with the government identifying who does and who doesn't get due process. And I think that that's a dangerous precedent to set. And maybe that's something that I'm too worried about, but I think it puts the machinations in place for violations of individual liberty and human rights when you're saying we're going to allow executive authorities to decide who does and who doesn't get due process. And I think that just goes against fundamental notions that we have about what people are entitled to in terms of being able to present a defense, being able to cross-examine witnesses, and all those sorts of things that are built into the law.
But if you're, I'm sorry.
No, please.
But if you're, and I'll push back a little bit. But if the immigration problem is so monumental, if that issue is so monumental, should we, stop the solution to that problem because of this
Due process.
Because of this due process issue that you've identified that many legal scholars might not think is a due process issue.
Yeah. Well, I draw the parallel again with the red flag laws, right? Is that due process, you're basically taking away the liberty interest, you're taking away the property of the person before they get any due process. And that's a concern that many gun owners have about red flag orders. Here, you are forcefully detaining a person, forcefully extricating them from the country, and that certainly implicates a liberty interest, a property interest, and I think requires due process. And I get that people disagree, but I think this gets to your concern about, right, the sort of precedent that we're setting about consolidating this sort of authority in the executive, and at the same time ignoring other constitutional protections like due process.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I feel like in many ways my political views have been very consistent over my entire lifetime. It's just kind of a center-left liberal, but the thing that I've learned in my time in gun culture, and this I think came from both people more on the right and more on the left, to the right of me and to the left of me, I'd say, is you just trust the government too much. And so I think some of that is now coming to fruition because it's an administration that I am sort of less inclined to trust to begin with, and then doing things that sort of makes me feel a little bit less trustful also. So I have to thank my time in gun culture for making me more skeptical of centralized power. But yeah, I had an interaction with someone online, which is not always the greatest thing, but it was a friend of mine. And he said, I really don't have any sympathy for this guy who's been deported, whose name I'm blanking on right now. And I said, that's probably the most important person to make sure that their rights are secured, right? The person that we don't have sympathy for. And I mentioned, this case, the Rahimi case that went to the Supreme Court.
Yep.
I met the federal public defender who was on charge of his case, who brought the case, and he's like, he's a terrible person. He's absolutely a criminal, and he was definitely going to jail under state laws, and there didn't need to be all of these additional federal charges, right? And because by fighting for this terrible person, but on behalf of all the people who aren't terrible, who could be subject to that injustice.
No matter who's in power. I
Right.
mean, that's the thing that I think so many, whether it's the left that's in the executive, that's in power in the executive branch, or the right, you don't want the mechanisms in place for that person to be able to exercise the discretion to deprive you of due process or other rights that you have, either naturally or pursuant to the Constitution.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point that so many people miss in this debate, whether it's the immigration debate or others, is that you don't want the government to have that authority and that sort of arbitrary authority vested in the executive to say, we don't like this person, they're a bad dude or a bad gal, and so we're going to deprive them of due process and just make the determination ourselves.
Yeah.
I think it just illustrates the point that we all have to guard against this. The means are justified by the ends. If we like the result, we always have to be testing ourselves. Are we being honest about what happened before that result? And that's probably more important than the result in most cases.
Because the people who are supportive of Trump today, rightly or wrongly, have to be satisfied that if the person they don't like gets elected in 2028, they may exercise that same sort of authority in a way they don't like. And so my point, and I think part of your point, is that we don't want that mechanism in place to begin with.
Yeah. And to your point about what these stages of learning, I hopefully wrote this piece in the spirit of just trying to explain myself, but also I'm not an expert in any of those issues, and I'm typically very reluctant to write about things that I don't have some expertise in, because I respect people who do have expertise. But and also I'm learning also, as people respond to me in this, and I learn things like, hey, maybe this move towards more executive power has been going on longer than you think. Go back and check. And so I went go back and check. I was like, holy, if you look at executive orders per year, I mean, I think it's Carter, Clinton, Reagan, Trump, or something like that. But there was it's not like Democrats haven't used the executive order.
Yeah, exactly. But of course, from a logical standpoint, I'm not sure that justifies continuing the expansion of that power, because it's been, might be a little fallacy in that. But
No. So the point that was made to me was like, where were you 20 years ago worried about executive power when the Democrats were doing it? And I was like, fair point. Like I wasn't, I don't notice it as much, right?
Well, Professor Yamane can't be everywhere. He's not omnipotent and omniscient. So
for the record, I wasn't 20 years ago raising any concerns about it either. So.
Well, and also, I say like, I wasn't in I don't know that I complained at all through the first Trump presidency, so it's not like I've just been complaining about Trump. I actually posted right after he was elected, which was a surprise to me, as to many people on the left. Sort of 10 expectations or 10 hopes for the Trump presidency, because I thought, hey, he won fair and square. Let's see how it goes. So, it's not, I haven't had a grudge to bear against Trump for 12 years now. It's like, I literally think he came out of the gates with much more of a plan to just disrupt things, and he succeeded. He disrupted me for sure.
Well, I think it's important to understand, and I'm certainly no expert on executive unitary power, but I think it's a fair statement to say that, I've read Scalia. He was a strong believer in that unitary power. I've read Roberts, what he said, but there's a lot of room for debate about what the Constitution says about that power. We can pick apart. I was reading the Constitution before we started, and you can pick it apart and say whatever you want about that argument. There's ambiguity there, for sure.
Yeah, no, and it's been I think great. I went back. I read the Declaration of Independence. When was the last time I read the Declaration of Independence? I read the Constitution over. Like, wow, that was. You have to have a law degree. It's not like you can just read that. It's like very convoluted, but it was good. Like to get back and say, like, okay, maybe one response is let's get back to the foundations. Like, what do we stand for? As a nation. How did the founders construct this document as a way of reconciling competing interests and diversity. The same issues we're facing today, those were concerns they had then, and it's been working pretty good. And I hope it continues to work. And maybe, we see, like, I'm less worried now. I can't remember how many weeks ago I wrote that, but I feel less worried now than I did when I wrote it, although I'm not unworried.
Yeah.
But I think now we're seeing some of those sort of checks coming in and,
Well,
slowing down the processes.
Alex, I don't mean to hog the questions, but
No, please.
do you have any concerns about what the Article 3 branch, the judiciary, is doing? I mean, there are two concerns there, I guess you could talk about. Number one, there's probably been 15 or 20 restraining orders saying, President Trump, you can't do A, you can't do B, you can't do C. Do you have concerns that the judiciary is exerting too much authority, too much power, so that it's inhibiting the functions of the executive in terms of trying to fix some of the problems we have, like the debt?
Mhm.
Is that a problem? Are they stepping out of bounds?
I think maybe because they're going in a direction that I prefer. I don't
That's why I
shift.
asked the
No, it's a
question.
great question, and I have heard again in response to this piece, people saying like, hey, I don't know that it was the founders' idea that we would have all of these regional federal judges who had the ability to make law or enforce or interpret law that affects everybody in the country. And that's something I honestly had never thought about.
And it's interesting too, because Alex and I were talking about this. We love a federal district judge in Texas who enters a TRO that precludes the ATF from enforcing a rule nationwide because we like the result.
Right.
Do we like a judge in New Jersey? I don't know. In New Jersey, who says, Trump, you can't do this, when we don't like what the activity that's precluding. So
I want to come back to this example. So there was a district court judge who issued an injunction with respect to ATF rulemaking and enjoined the federal government from enforcing their rule nationwide. And so the question was, does the judge in the district court in Texas have the authority to enjoin the government outside of his jurisdiction, right? And many gun owners cheered for that, right? But I think this gets back to our point earlier, is that sets the precedent, and they have to be satisfied that it's okay for a district court judge in New Jersey, for instance, saying that we're going to enjoin the government from prohibiting abortion, and we're going to do that nationwide, for instance.
Yeah.
And clearly, the people who supported the judge in Texas would ordinarily, in terms of a democratic position, be opposed to that order from the judge in New Jersey. But they've already asserted that we agree with that authority. And so I think that gets back to the point that we don't want government officials acting outside of their specifically prescribed government or constitutional authority.
Yeah.
Whether or not you like the result, because eventually somebody who you don't agree with may occupy that position.
Yeah. No, I think this is probably it's I keep saying educational, but I think it's really educational to get put into a situation where, like, I'm feeling very uncomfortable now. How must it feel for other people when the shoe was on the other foot, right? And so yeah, I think that it's been an amazing process, because I feel great that I have met so many people with whom I disagree, because truly before I got into gun culture, I was living in an extremely blue bubble, and I still at work I'm mostly in a blue bubble. I live in a red town now, so I can't say, but I used to live in a blue bubble, and really getting involved with people who see the world differently than me has been completely to my benefit. And fortunately I know enough people who don't just fall into the shouting or ad hominem attacks, that it does create a situation where I can say, like, wow, I hadn't thought about that, or I respect your opinion, and so I need to take that information in and work with it and see what I think. So it's I think more people we would benefit if more people did that.
Yeah, I agree. and that's why we wanted to have you on to talk about this from the NRA annual meeting, right? And talk about, I mean, we're being very critical of Trump and the authority that he's exerted. I know that's a lot of your concern. That's our concern as well to some degree. I may lose half of my subscribers for saying so, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not, I'll backtrack. I'm still ambiguous about some of it.
Sure. No, I think I think there have been positive steps taken by the Trump administration, but I think we need to call a spade, and I think we need to be willing to step back from our political ideology to consider the worries, the concerns of the other side, and I think that helps us, as you say, become more educated, to become more empathetic, become more, I think, open to conversation about how to address this in a way that works better for everybody.
Yeah.
And one of the concerns I wanted to make sure we talked about, and we're running short on time here, is you mentioned emergency rule. I highlighted that in your article here, and this is another example, I think, of where people like the exertion of emergency rule when the person they support is in power, but loathe the exertion of emergency rule when the person they don't like is in power.
Yeah.
And we've seen this with the tariffs. We've seen this with immigration policy. We've seen this with drug policy. We saw this during COVID, for instance.
Yeah.
We see it at the state and local level now.
Yeah.
They're adopting
Hurricane,
Yeah. And what we've seen is that this has become a common tactic, no matter who's in power, of basically generating a made-up emergency. Occasionally there's a real emergency, but the fact that immigration has been a problem for decades, or that tariffs, or the trade balance has been a problem for decades, is not all of a sudden an emergency. And I think that sets a dangerous precedent going forward as well. Is that a fair summation of your concern?
Yeah. No, it's probably more elaborate. As I look what I wrote, it's just one sentence that I put in there. It's it's suggestive of, like, I feel like that's not a good thing. It's not something that I've studied in depth or that I know a lot about. But I do know, again, I think it's probably not the best test. A great test is to say, again, if the shoe's on the other foot, how are you feeling about that, right? Like when they declare an emergency and say, you can't have guns in public, right? Or whatever the case may be. Like, whoa, that doesn't make sense. But if it goes in our favor, then we're like, okay, yeah, that's good. And I don't know how often emergency powers are being declared, but I have been noticing it recently.
Yeah.
So,
more and more it seems like.
Yeah.
Well, any other comments? I know we talked a little bit. We didn't cover all of your article, of course. Put a link to it in the show notes so people can go and read it for themselves. I just wanted to give us an opportunity to talk through this. We see eye to eye on some things, but not everything.
Right.
And I hope that people got something from this conversation. But
I think my concluding note is we're 340 million people living on millions of square miles of land mass from all different parts of the world, different religious traditions, ethnic groups, beliefs. There's no way we're all going to agree on everything, right? And so, that's fine. We don't have to agree. And again, I think one thing that I've underappreciated, but I'm coming more to appreciate more, is that our constitutional system was designed precisely to address this reality, like on a much smaller scale back then, right? But people thought of themselves as citizens of their state, or their, not of this federation.
Right.
And yet,
the whole idea behind federalism.
Yeah. And so, when it works well, it has the capacity. I hope it is not at a breaking point. Like now we're too big and too diverse for it to work. So I'm hopeful that it can continue to work. And part of my concern is that it seemed like if power shifts too much in one direction, then that has the potential to break the system. And and I don't know how real it is, because it's not, again, one of those things I haven't looked at a lot. But what power does the Supreme Court have to enforce any of these things if at some point the president's like, too bad? and be like, oh well,
Yeah.
you know,
Where does that leave us?
yeah.
Well, I
So
think your article does a great job of providing some thoughts,
Context.
notions, and context to help us all be more critical thinkers about our own positions. I really do.
yeah. Well,
Well, Dave, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I really appreciate you stopping by. I
yeah.
know you've got some plans this evening. I hope you have a great rest of the trip down here, and I'm sure we'll be in touch again in the near future.
Yeah, I hope so, and I'm flattered by the invitation to come talk about things that you guys probably know a lot more about than I do.
Oh, well, I don't know that for sure, but
well,
yeah.
if I had to bet, that's what I would bet.
There are very few people who are willing to sit between two attorneys to talk about these things.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Yeah, but
put things into perspective for the people watching. Yeah.
yeah, no, but I appreciate the opportunity and the education, and I look forward to being in touch more over the years.
Well, we appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
Good. All right, everybody, we're going to take a brief break here. Again, this is David Yamane, professor of sociology at Wake Forest. Gun Culture 2.0, Light Overheat, Gun Curious. Any other resources that people should look to?
No, I mean, I think the general place to go for everything I do is davidyamane.com. So
Okay, fantastic. davidyamane.com. All right, well, thanks again, and
yeah,
thanks
thank you
everybody
guys.
for tuning in.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everybody, we're back, and we are with our last guest for the day, John Howard. John Howard is the Director of NRA Education and Training. John, welcome to the Forge of Freedom.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Well, if you would start out, just introduce yourself a little bit. What's your background? How did you get involved with the NRA, and how long have you been involved with the Education and Training Division?
So I'm retired Navy. After I retired from the Navy, I was a pogue, an admin guy, but I always been an enthusiast. I came to NRA, was hired for the Youth Programs Department back in 2000, so I've been in the Education Training Division for 25 years now.
Okay. And you've been in the training and education. How long have you been the director?
About a year and a half.
Okay.
I was a deputy director prior to that, and I was a national manager of training prior to that. National instructor trainer before that. So
Okay.
I've been there a while.
Okay. I had a gentleman from NRA-ILA on earlier, and he talked a little bit about the history of the NRA. But if you would talk a little bit more about how the NRA's roots really has its roots in training. Can you get into some of that history?
Yeah, so after the Civil War, they decided that the people down in the South could shoot a lot better than people up in the North. And they formed the National Rifle Association to train citizens in marksmanship.
Okay. So they were the Yankees didn't have as good.
Right, they didn't have the same skills.
Yeah.
So they weren't
today.
Yeah. So they were concerned with the marksmanship after the Civil War, and it was founded by some officers, right, from the Civil War. And so the NRA has its founding and its roots in training, and has carried on that legacy for over nearly 200 years. Yeah.
150 years.
And so if you would talk a little bit about where the NRA is today, how many instructors does the NRA have nationwide? How many, if you know the numbers, how many students do they teach annually? And what are some of the things that the NRA is working on, if they're changing anything or coming up with any new programs?
So we currently have right about 120,000 instructors and range safety officers, about 7,000 coaches, 2,200 training counselors that actually certify our instructors. They reach hundreds of thousands of students a year. Actually reporting the training, NRA training, but our instructors teach more than, just NRA courses. A lot of them teach their state carry. So, I know they reach probably nearly 1 million a year.
So you train, so you have these programs, these training programs to certify instructors to teach NRA curriculum.
Yeah.
And then you get a sense for how many people they are teaching because they register their classes.
Right. So, you have to report, if you're doing an NRA course, you have to report it, register it, report the students in order to print an NRA certificate.
Yeah. So these are not made up numbers. They're not, just
not
pulling
not
out of
for the
thin air.
NRA.
Yeah.
But I am just assuming we have so many instructors that teach non-NRA courses. They come to NRA. Basically, what the NRA certification does is gives an individual credibility for what they already know. So, you got to be a gun person. You've got to be an active, talented shooter to get through an instructor course, get the certification. And a lot of trainers don't even teach the NRA curriculum, but they have the credibility for, and then they can present their curriculum to the states or whatever they need to do.
And I know a lot of the NRA curriculum is recognized by many states for the purpose of licensing requirements, but some states have separate requirements, and as you say, the NRA instructors may adapt the curriculum to meet whatever state requirements are available, or they may just, irrespective of the licensing requirement, may be teaching some other curriculum. Right?
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
It's safe to say, I think, the NRA is the largest firearms training organization in the world.
I would feel that. Yeah, I feel that. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And how many instructors did you say earlier?
Right, about 120,000 instructors and range safety officers, and
Okay.
about 8,000 coaches.
So I think
Yeah,
that's
that's
important
incredible.
to understand when they see the NRA on television. They don't see what you're doing for youth or what you're doing for training.
Yeah.
And that's what you represent.
Yeah. One of the things that one of the reasons I invited you to come on the show is to talk a little bit about the inaugural Trainers Symposium, which is tomorrow and Sunday, right?
It is, yes.
Could you tell what is that? I know that there was an email sent out to all the trainers to attend.
Yes.
What's going to be going on at that symposium?
So, I mean, for years, we've always wanted to do something to engage our trainers more than just having like an update, right? And the director of shows and exhibits threw something at us, said, "Hey, have you ever thought about doing a B2B symposium?" We're like, "What's that?" So it just grew from there, and it was put together kind of quick. Our first meeting on it was at SHOT Show. We met with a couple people, and I hired a really good guy in late last year, Ed Zoe. He's a really high-speed competitive shooter. I mean, shoots IDPA, NIPSC, and that kind of stuff. And he's young, so he's like really in tune with all the latest stuff. He's got his finger on the pulse of what's going on in the industry. So I signed him to do this, and he's kind of put it together. And I'm very proud of what he's done so far. So the big test is going to be how the weekend goes, right? But it's something we'd like to do every annual meeting. I mean, like in the past, we had the Personal Protection Expo. That was just geared towards trainers and things like that. But this is something that we can do at the annual meeting, and it's open to everybody. So anybody can come, but you have to be an NRA instructor to be eligible for the raffle. So a lot of the people have donated stuff to us to raffle to the attendees. We're giving free renewal to all the attendees that are instructors. We're renewing them for a 2-year renewal. So, and I know there's things that we got a sponsor, shootingclasses.com. He's sponsoring us a mixer we're going to do tomorrow night at 6:00. So, come over, mingle with other trainers, other like-minded people, have a drink. Doesn't have to be alcoholic. And we're going to have some snacks, things like that. It's like a meet and greet. So.
Yeah, sounds good. And the symposium is tomorrow from 2 to 6 and Sunday from 10 to 2. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so even if you're not a trainer, you're not an instructor, if you have any interest in being a trainer and instructor, or if you're just curious about what the training organization or training arm of the NRA is all about, I assume this would be a good introduction to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's we have people that are going to be doing presentations like CERT and Mantis and those kind of people that actually have the tools. And there's a guy that's going to be doing hearing, how important hearing is as an instructor and for the students, and the things that are available for that. I mean, so there's all kinds of things that are great information for any shooter, anybody, any enthusiast. So everybody's welcome. All NRA members, everybody that's here is welcome, but the only requirement for the raffle is you have to be an instructor.
Okay. All right. Well, John, I really appreciate you being here. Mike, do you have any other questions? We covered.
Well, a couple things. Where can people find out about training? If they're in Tucson or New Jersey, Texas, how can they find out about an NRA course? And then I've got the thing, if I want to say something, don't let me forget about the literature that they get with these courses.
Sure.
Yeah, NRAinstructors.org. That is our website. That's where instructors register their training. They can take, the students can register for their classes. That's how they report their training. So all of the advertisement for our courses is at NRAinstructors.org.
And I pulled that up on the screen here so our viewers can see it. This is NRAinstructors.org.
Right.
And you see there's find an NRA training course near you.
Right.
So that's the best place to go if you're looking for some firearms training.
Yep. Put in their zip code, a search radius from 10 to 500 miles, and they can whatever's coming up in that area.
And you can
It'll
see
give the
there's
contact information.
Yeah, perfect. You can see there are many disciplines here that the NRA is involved in teaching, right?
Yeah,
So
there is. And
yeah.
we're looking at streamlining the naming of those courses and streamlining it to, they've evolved over the years. So, you know,
Yeah.
things have changed. But we're going to modernize that. I've just hired a curriculum coordinator, and one of his main focuses is going to be we need to get a CCW handbook out because we're using the pistol and personal protection outside the home. We're going to update pictures, language, align all of the classes that have come out. So he's got a
great.
Yeah, and the
big
defensive
task
pistol
ahead
is
of
still
him.
on PDF.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you do that class?
Yes.
I love that class.
That's a
I
great
think
class.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. One thing I will tell people about the literature that they get. First of all, these classes are usually very reasonably priced. But one of the things we always tell students is, just for instance, the basic handgun course. The literature you get is, I mean, it's worth the price of admission just for the book.
In our opinion, it's second to none in terms of basic gun handling and marksmanship.
So we commend you for the literature you have, and we think that's worth the price of admission in and of itself before you do it. If you don't do anything else, you get the book.
Yeah.
So,
Are there any big changes on the horizon with respect to NRA training division or how they interact with instructors or other issues?
Yes. So, I mean, we have new leadership. We're hiring new people, and our leaders are shooters and very active shooters, competitors. Our direct boss is a high-speed competitor. So we're going to bring in things like practical rifle, practical shotgun type class, defensive classes.
Nice.
With that platform, we're going to add reflex sights, red dot to our, pistol courses, defensive courses. There's other things that we have planned. I just can't think of them off the top of my head.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, so the big thing is we're building back our staff. So I just hired two. I've got 2 openings now. If you guys are looking for jobs in Virginia,
right? You got
right?
2 people here.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, as we fill those and we get real, motivated people in there to do the job that we got ahead, that's our main focus is modernize and, bring everything into alignment.
Yeah.
Like the CCW and personal protection outside the home and defensive pistol. We want all the range commands to be the exact same way and all that stuff like that.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
well, I want to just commend you for your curriculum, and I may offend somebody. I hope I don't. Your curriculum, your literature. Of course, I can't speak for all your instructors. You've got a gazillion of them.
Yeah.
But one of the struggles that I encounter with folks, especially people who have been around guns all their life, think they don't need instruction.
Right.
I can promise you that the work that the NRA does to train people is sufficient that even if you've been around guns all your life, you're going to learn something.
Yeah.
And it's going to be valuable.
Yeah. Agreed. All right, John. Well, thanks a lot for coming along. We really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us to chat about the NRA Training and Education Division. And I hope that if you're watching and you're here in Atlanta, don't hesitate to go check out the inaugural Trainers Symposium tomorrow from 2 to 6 and Sunday from 10 to 2.
Yep, absolutely.
All right.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks for
I
coming
hope
by.
I see you guys at our symposium.
Well,
Yeah. All right, we're back on here for just a minute. I hope that that everybody enjoyed the guests we had today.
Well, we need to explain what John Howard.
That's right. I just muted the mic, but John Howard, we'd never met before. And
Actually, I have.
oh, okay, Mike met him once, but that was a number of years ago, right? He was walking off and he asked if we were brothers. So yeah,
I can go home now.
so exactly. Anyway, that's the last guest we have for the day. I hope that you all enjoyed the guests we had. As I said at the beginning of the show, we're going to have a number of guests, a full day tomorrow as well, starting with Jacob Paulson with concealedcarry.com, Stephanie Heatherton from the Tuttle Twins, and Dean Weingarten, who is a journalist and writes for AmmoLand primarily. So I hope you'll tune in tomorrow from 3 to 6 again, and then on Sunday from 9 to noon. If you can't catch us during those times, no sweat. We will be, these are recorded, and I will be piecing these up into segments to reproduce at a later date. So if you can't make it, you can catch the content at a later date. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Thanks for tuning in to the Forge of Freedom live from the NRA annual meeting in Atlanta. And as always, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.